Oh, we're doing a project, kind of a research project, discussing how veterans that have gotten out of the military and separated find religious meaning in like various ways, and especially in regards to like separation from the military and losing that like sense of structure in their everyday lives and camaraderie and things like that. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about your experience, and if that leads to any discussion, that'd be great. So, all right. So to start off, how did you end up in the military to begin with?
I wanted to go to Hawaii.
Wanted to go to Hawaii? Okay. Did you go to Hawaii?
Yeah, I went to Hawaii. I actually never thought of going into the military. I actually applied when I was graduating from Chico. I actually applied to both the Air Force and the Army. And my husband's a surfer, and at that point, I thought he'd like to go to Hawaii. So I said I'd go in if they gave me Hawaii. And they didn't believe me at first, but they tried to offer me other things, and I said no, and then they said yes. So I ended up going into the military because of the place.
Okay.
But service has always been very important in my life and in my family's. So after joining, it turned into serving my country and serving each other that were in the military. It wasn't so much about the place anymore.
Okay. And how long did you spend in the military? And while you were serving, what exactly were you doing?
Okay. So I was in the Army for 6 years. And then I actually switched to the Air Force when I was at Landstuhl, Germany. Because I wanted to go to a certain graduate program that the Army wasn't offering at that time.
Okay.
I served as a nurse and in all capacities. Med-surg, labor and delivery, trauma, and I ended up deploying to Iraq as a trauma nurse.
Okay. So what was your experience like transitioning to military life from the civilian life?
To military life?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, that was pretty easy, going into the military, because it turns into taking care of each other, the camaraderie, being there, taking care of your patients. As a nurse, that's part of what we do. But I didn't have any problems transitioning into it. Being told what to do, all those things are a little different at first, especially when you first join and you either go to boot camp or whatever it is that you're going to.
Yes, sir.
Having not I think the hardest is realizing that your life is not your own. They can call you up 24/7, and I was often called up 24/7. You can't plan anything long term, as far as like vacations and everything, because they own you in a sense. But that really didn't bother me too much overall. But I think that's hard for especially the people going in now. This is a little different generation, and this generation seems to be more about me sometimes. And so I found even with some of my young lieutenants, they didn't comprehend that, and it was very difficult for them to understand that you are on 24/7. It's not just words. If I need you to do my mission, you're going to be called, even if you have XYZ planned. It's all about the mission in the military, not the individual, and I think that's really hard for a lot of people to get used to, but not myself, and I don't think that was the problem.
Yes, ma'am. So, building on that a little bit more, how do you think your daily ritual changed when you went from a civilian life to a military life? Kind of like the structuredness of a military life, and just kind of things you did every day once you transitioned into the military that were not a part of your civilian life.
The group aspect of if somebody gets in trouble, you're all in trouble. That was kind of difficult to, as an adult, not understanding why we all suffer and have to do commander's calls or additional training or stand downs because of one person doing something wrong.
Yes, ma'am.
My everyday schedule, I mean, you work. It is a job in some sense. You know, you don't work usually unless you're deployed or in a situation where you have short staff, that you work more than, you know, the normal, what most people work in a job. It's the on-call situation. But I don't think that was, you know, the everyday life. I did the same thing as I did in a civilian job, you know, taking care of patients at that point, you know, or starting to be in charge of people. Yeah, it's pretty easy.
Okay. And I'd like for you to kind of discuss a little bit the process of transferring duty stations and then also going on deployments and things like that separated you from the community that you were rooted in.
Yeah. So PCSing, going to different duty stations. I had 3 children, young children, some going into school, starting school. And so, you know, when they're younger, it's not as much of an issue changing schools every 3 years or 2 years. I have a spouse who was in the Navy and got out and used his GI Bill and became a teacher. So he worked for Department of Defense school. So the transition was always difficult, finding him a job so he could fulfill his goals and my goals. You know, I really didn't have too much of you don't really have a lot of choice.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, you can put down what you prefer, but at some point it's always about the mission and where you're needed. So balancing family life, children's needs, my husband's needs, was always somewhat difficult. But even as we moved, when my kids were in high school, I have one that graduated from Japan, and it was his senior year that we moved there. And I have 2 that graduated from Aviano, Italy, and one was a senior again, and the youngest got to go the 3 years. I think being overseas, it was easier for them because all the kids are somewhat new and they're all transitioning. It was a smaller high school, and so they actually had a good experience being in different cultures. Now that they're adult men and one's actually active duty, they look back on those times as good times. We did a lot of family things. Moving, you know, your furniture and your pets is always an issue. There's usually things lost. But I don't really focus on material things as much.
Yes, ma'am.
As long as my family was with me and you know, we were able to, we looked at it as an adventure and we had actually a good time. So PCS deployments, now that's a whole nother thing. Being deployed, whether it's for even a few months or a half a year or even for a year, that's hard on everyone. I think I worried more about my family and how they were reacting to me being in a war zone and being, you know, you keep a lot of things from them. You don't let them know that, you know, I'm hanging up right now because we're under mortar attack, or I never told them like things like walking to work and being shot at until later when you get back, because they're living with that stress every single day of a phone call or someone showing up at their home, telling them that their loved one's been injured or dead. So deployment, coming back, I think my transition was very rough coming back, because instead of going back to the people that knew me very well and could probably see if there were issues, I actually PCS to Korea, to a very remote base within just a few months after coming back. And those people didn't know who I was before I deployed. And so coming into that situation where we were playing war again 1 week of every month, complete with mortars and people shooting at each other, you know, as training, wasn't probably the best thing for me. And it's hard for the family after being separated for that amount of time, and then being again, I was gone for a year. It was rough. So transition and being flexible in the military is very important as far as your relationships, your family, because you lose all those friends. You do gain friends though. In the military, you can show up within a month and have really good friends because we're all in that position.
Yes, ma'am. So, would you say that during the first example you talked about, you kind of traveled with your family when you PCS'd, that your family was kind of a transferable community for you?
Yeah,
and
it was.
That was something you were able to lean on? And then when you were deployed, how did you kind of build that community again once you got to your duty station? And
Once I was deployed over
Yes,
there?
ma'am.
Well, actually, I took a few of the people that I actually worked for me were with me.
okay,
So that was kind of nice. You know, a lot of times you deploy with the people you train. So I actually had a very good group of people. And
so
then
you had that transferable community.
they
again,
came
and
with me.
Okay,
And the new people I met, because I had there's definitely a lot of new people, there were a lot of reservists. You connect very quickly when you're in those situations, when you're seeing that all the time. It's very raw and it's very, you learn what's the importance of life very quickly. And so friendships and relationships build very quickly, and you end up thinking more about them. Who I wasn't as close to when we started out, but we've maintained and been very close ever since. And that person usually you form a relationship that's probably going to be a lifetime relationship if you've gone through that kind of hell together.
yes, ma'am. And kind of moving on from that topic, do you recall the day that your service ended?
Oh yeah, May 1st, 2010.
Okay. Are there any specific feelings that you have tied to that day or that memory?
Well, it's probably not as bad for me because I'm still serving, just in a different uniform.
Yes, ma'am.
I actually did some things when I was retiring. I took a week and I went to Arlington, and I went to the section of the people who probably died when I was over in Iraq, and wore my uniform and visited those things that are spiritually important in my life. So I actually had some kind of a ceremony closure. That was helpful. It is really rough though, transitioning out, whether you're retiring or you're leaving that after 6 or 8 years. The community that you once had, whether you PCS to a new area, is gone. And it's really hard sometimes to make those relationships as intense and as unique as they are in the military, because everyone's different. This community, it's still hard. And it's 2017. And do I have those close friends like I did in the military? No. These people are established here. They've had relationship for many, many years. I'm the new person. They don't know me, I'm a veteran. So that transitioning coming out is rough for almost everyone. I don't know anyone that doesn't have a hard time transitioning out of the military. I am involved in a service group called IAVA. It's Iraq, Afghanistan Veterans of America. And we do a lot of things nationally and individually, but it's still not the same, And there's a camaraderie there. We usually are doing something to make it better for our veterans, but it's still very different because you're not in that 24/7 relationship where you're facing the same things as each other. My service though continues,
Yes,
so what I do now is it really helps with a lot of that other part of what is in the military. Working at the VA, I'm with veterans. I prefer to work with veterans or active duty just because that's what I know. That's my community, my culture. And so I do get a lot of support from this community, and I prefer it a lot of times than sometimes the civilian community.
Yes, ma'am. And would you speak just a little bit to what you do here specifically at the VA?
Okay. So I am now a psychiatric nurse practitioner. after my own, after my own problems coming back and transitioning from deployment and having probably the more typical things that I see in my own patients, I decided to go back to school at USD and get my degree as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I work 2 different places. I work in the emergency psych clinic, seeing the brand new veterans getting out of the military, or those that are in crisis, or those that are suicidal, or those that can't see their doctor for some reason. And then I work here at the Aspire Center, where we have a residential program for veterans with PTSD, TBI, and we try to get them back on their feet, get them the therapy they need, the support they need, so that they can go on with their life and they can have a good life. Because we know so much more about PTSD now than we did like even in Vietnam or Korean War. I mean, it was always there. You can go back to as far to the Korean War. I mean, any war, Civil War, you know, it's all kind of the same symptoms written about. But we didn't understand the physical aspects of PTSD and how it affects both physical and psychological. So that's what I do now. I'm hoping that we can make a difference in each veteran that I see.
Yes, ma'am. And based on like your experience with what you're just talking about, being a psychiatric nurse practitioner, what would you say most veterans struggle with the most during their transition out of military service? And does that remain consistent across the different like MOSs and things like that, or does that vary? Like, do people that have more combat-centered MOSs have a harder time, an easier time, or stuff like that?
Trauma's trauma. Trauma could be from combat, which is, you know, most people think of PTSD with combat, but the reality is the sailors who took care of all those bodies after the tsunami, hundreds of bodies in the water, children, babies, they have trauma. You have training accidents where people are decapitated in front of you or killed, that's trauma. You have both men and women who are sexually raped or abused, called military sexual trauma, that's trauma. In fact, the most common reason for PTSD is physical or sexual abuse as an adult or a child. So we focus on the combat aspect. MOSs, no. I see everyone from SEALs, snipers, you name it. We don't all want to talk about it, but the trauma comes out the same in all of those individuals. Problems sleeping, nightmares, kind of getting away and being alone, irritability. They get to the point where they just don't feel anything, because when you're in a mission, whatever that mission is, a pilot, a person shooting a weapon, a sniper, a trauma nurse, a cook, you know, especially when you're involved in a wartime situation. The physical reactions of the body are the same no matter what. And so it doesn't really, we just don't talk about it, because we try to just keep going on and complete our mission. And that avoidance of thinking about our feelings and our emotions and how we're reacting to seeing our guy killed in front of us, the mission continues. Just like I started this interview, it's always about the mission in the military. It's not about your needs or my needs. That's what happens. So I don't see any difference in the MOSs. I see everybody that has problems. As far as, what other thing did you ask me?
I think you spoke to the questions I asked already, and then I just have one more question for you. So what would you say helps people the most with that transition out of the military?
Okay.
Would you say it's something like rituals that people are able to go participate in, community,
people, being there for one another, getting the help they need if they need physical or emotional help, having a job. But I think probably the most important thing is actually having a purpose again, having their own mission, whether it's in the military or not the military, a mission of the life. So for me, transitioning, going into becoming a nurse practitioner is now my mission. And that purpose, if you don't have a purpose, it's really hard for people, no matter what, to find that passion that's in all of us about whatever we do. You know, I always tell people, what are you going to school for? And if they tell me criminal justice or something, and I say, is that your passion business? And they go, no. I go, life is too short. You know, when you see people die and you see people critically injured, and you're with your buddy and you see that in front of you, you realize what's important in life. It's your health, your friends, your family. And the materialistic things of going after a job for money really is not going to make you be fulfilled as a person. And I know your class is about spiritual. You know, there's a spiritual loss that you didn't ask me about, but I think I need to address. When you go to combat and you're see that, I can tell you most people, if they were spiritual before, say they went to church or whatever, they feel nothing when they come back. And there's a definite loss when I talk to people and they say, I just don't feel anything anymore. Or they're mad at God, or they don't feel as spiritual. But some people actually come back with more of a spiritual feeling. But I'd say the majority of them come back not feeling anything anymore. And that has to do with the numbing and the avoidance that when you see these kind of things, children and things that, you know, I can't even tell you about, but you think that humans should not do to one another, it does something to the spiritual part of you as a person. So I know you didn't ask me about that, but that's really important. And that having the lack of the spiritual aspect, as far as being a human being and transitioning and all those other things, some people that's their core, and if they lose that, it's really hard for them to transition back.
Yes, ma'am.
So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, sir. So, how did you end up in the military in the first place?
I didn't want to go to college directly out of high school.
I can understand that.
And so I was living in New Jersey, and during 9/11, I think I was a sophomore or junior in high school. And from the math wing in our high school, we could see the smoke from the Twin Towers. So that was something that was a driving factor that I felt like I wanted to serve, and it just hit very close to home. So right out of high school, I decided to enlist in the United States Navy.
What did you do in the Navy?
I was part of the Special Operations Division, so I was part of Naval Special Warfare.
Okay.
I'm something called a SWCC. It's a Special Warfare Combatant Crewman.
Okay. All right. So, what kind of process, or how would you describe the process of like transferring duty stations, going on deployments, and like being separated from your family and like the community you had at home?
Sure. So yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a shock at first, but you definitely are with a lot of people that are going through the same stuff. And being in the military, you're always moving, you're always traveling and always moving. So we were never really in one spot for more than maybe 6 months at a time. Even when we were home, we were always training. But that just kind of brings everybody closer together, that the guys that you're working with, because everybody's traveling all the time. But it wasn't too difficult. I mean, deployments were only 6 months at a time. Yeah.
All right. So, kind of building on that a little bit more, what was it like transitioning into military life with respect to like your daily rituals, like your daily routine? How did that change?
Sure, yeah. Waking up at 4 a.m. in boot camp, stuff like that, that was definitely the biggest shock. But I think it only took maybe a couple weeks to kind of get acclimated to that. And it still wasn't my most favorite part, waking up early or going to food at a scheduled time every day. But you get acclimated pretty quickly.
Okay. And do you recall the day that your service ended, the day you like left the Navy?
Yeah. It had been pre-planned for a few months, so when your contract comes to an end, you kind of have about a year out. They'll start asking you if you want to re-enlist or what your intentions are. So towards the end of my contract, I kind of knew that I was ready to separate and come back into the civilian world, and do college and just kind of change career paths. So I was very set up, and the Navy has programs, the military has programs for transitioning you out of military life into civilian life. So the career counselors set us up with the programs that we had to go through, and they helped with resumes and things like that.
Okay. And kind of going back to the first questions I asked you, but coming outside.
Sure.
So, how did your daily life with respect to ritual and daily activities change transitioning out of the military? Was it a smooth transition to the way your life was before, or were you changed by like your experiences?
Yeah, well, I think you're always changed by everything that you encounter in your life, everybody that you encounter, and the things that you do. But transitioning out, it was definitely, it's the same thing as going in. It took a little bit of time. Like I was still waking up early even when I didn't have to. But it was nice not having to shave every day. So it's definitely, it was a good feeling.
All right, and so going from transitioning duty stations and going on deployments and changing like your community and the people you surrounded yourself with so consistently in the military, how did it feel, and what was your experiences transitioning back into a civilian lifestyle where you're more sedentary in the same spot and then surrounded by the same kind of people every day?
Yeah, there's definitely not the sense of camaraderie in maybe a college setting, unless maybe you're in a fraternity or something like that. But there's something to be said about suffering with another individual. So when we go through training, we're suffering by waking up early or having to do things long hours, 24 hours, 48 hours at a time. Just that little bit of suffering kind of grows this this bond that you don't connect with other people that don't have that. But transitioning, I mean, we still meet amazing people coming into the civilian world, and there's not much of a hurdle there.
Okay. And has there been anything in particular that's helped you find a sense of community or find a sense of camaraderie? Like any like clubs or anything like that you participate in that's helped? Or
Sure, yeah, so it's kind of what you kind of get out of it, what you put into it. So I've joined civilian clubs as well as the student veteran organization, because everybody knows that we have the veteran background. So that was the first thing that I thought to join, just because everybody is kind of in the same boat there. And everybody just kind of knows everybody once you get in there. There's no real hurdles to jump over. You were a veteran, so you're just accepted. But I think joining a lot of the regular clubs on campus, like Olay Club, or I joined the transfer team to help transfer students, that definitely puts you into a group that opens up your world to a little more traditional students.
all right, and one last question: how do you see your transition out of college life into like the working environment?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I've already spoken to a few companies, and know that they like that I have experience, but at the same time I'm a little bit older, so as an older student I'll be starting at the same pay that maybe a younger student will be, and I'm sure I'll have bosses that are younger than me. But it's yet to be seen, so I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
All right, well thank you very much for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Let's go ahead and try to get started a little bit.
Sure.
So, how did you end up finding yourself in the military? What drew you to it?
So there are really two things that led to me joining the military. And one was I have a large family history. Both my parents are veterans. They served. My mom was in the Navy. My father was in the Coast Guard. Both of their fathers served in World War II. So there's a little bit of that growing up. I knew I had that family history. And then maybe the biggest driving factor was when I was in high school, I was living between, both my parents were divorced, so I was living between two houses, and neither of my parents have a college education. And I didn't really realize this until I started applying to universities, and there's that question like, are you a first generation, student? And I've never thought about this until I filled that box out a bunch of times, but I didn't really have anybody there to like guide me to, or guide me through graduating high school. It was either get a job, go to school on your own, or move out and do whatever kind of thing. So I ended up not very prepared to leave high school and go to university or anything but go into the workforce. and like I didn't take my SATs, and I think a big part of that was neither of my parents were able to help me, and then they were both single parents working full time, and so I just didn't have a lot of guidance. And I remember my dad told me, he said, you have a few options. You can live with me and pay rent, live with me and go to school, or you can get out, or you can do what I did and join the military. And he took me to the recruiting station because I expressed interest in that. And this was in 2006, so we were in 2 wars. And he told me that I looked into the Marine recruiting depot, and he just pushed me in the back and said, no, that one or that one. He pointed at Air Force or Navy, and I said, all right, let's go in there. And that's how that happened.
All right. So, what was your experience transitioning into military life, in relation to your rituals and your daily activities and just your routine every day?
Yeah. Well, you don't get a whole lot of choice. You sign up, you enlist, they ship you to boot camp, and that's 6 weeks of just here is your routine, here is your daily experience, and they obviously teach you to be very regimented, hygiene, cleanliness, how to fold your clothes, what to do with your few possessions you have. They teach you all that to prepare you to live in these, subpar living conditions, like on a ship or in the battlefield or wherever you are, in a barracks. So they kind of prepare you for that. But getting out of boot camp, the thing that, that's just how you were trained. You were changed in that way. So the transition was a forced one into where and then I left boot camp and I was immediately shipped off to my duty station, where for the first year and a few months I lived on board the ship. That's where my bed was, that's where I ate breakfast and ate dinner and laid my head. So it's pretty wild, but when you're 18, 19, you kind of just deal with it, right? Just like kind of moving to college, all of a sudden you're in this new environment and you get by, you make friends, you figure it out.
All right, so kind of moving on from that, what would you just discuss a little bit the process of transferring to different duty stations and going on deployment and things like that, and being separated from community that you had established in one place and maybe building new communities in different places or in transition on a ship or things
right.
like that?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest hardships on service members is that, being young like I was 19 when I went to boot camp. That wasn't so bad, but I was living in Washington State, Seattle area, got shipped to boot camp in the Great Lakes area, and then my first duty station was on the East Coast in Norfolk, Virginia. So you show up there with your sea bag on your back, the clothes they give you and the toothbrush they give you, and then all of a sudden you're there and you're supposed to make a life for yourself somehow. Like I said, I lived on the ship for the first year and a half, which is not uncommon, because you just don't have any possessions and you're getting to know everybody. Your duty station, or my experience, my ship was a ship of maybe 560 people, and you have your own work center. So those are your family now, whether you like them or not. They're there to take care of you and show you the ropes. So I lived on ship for a while, and then eventually you get established and familiar with the area, and I got an apartment out in town with a guy I worked with, and that was all right. And then 4.5 years later, I got orders to San Diego, here in San Diego. And so I was about 24. So I had a vehicle that I bought, I drove that over here. I had a few possessions, and they help you with your moves and everything. They pay for a truck to move to pack all your goods for you and move it to your next duty station for you, very cheap. And I moved here and I got an apartment out in town, out in Pacific Beach, with some roommates, and made that transition, and I'm still here, so I like it. So deployments are wild. So you have your ship is usually, it's stationed in a city, and it stays there for a while. You come in and out doing weekend or a few weeks here and there out at sea. But a deployment, of course, is the big, you're leaving for 6 to 8 months. So as a command, they usually give the entire crew 2 weeks at home. So they'll send half of the crew home for 2 weeks, and then the other half will hold down the fort, do the work. Then they'll swap 2 weeks later, and then the second half will go to see their families and do whatever they need to do or prepare for this deployment. and then you leave. And it is pretty crazy that you move all the things that you would need for the next 8 months onto the ship, and then one day you wake up at home, and the next day you wake up with just ocean around you, and you know you're not going to come back for a while. I couldn't imagine what that's like for people with families. Luckily, I was always a single sailor. It wasn't so hard for me. Deployments were a lot of fun. A lot of work, but a lot of fun. The community on the ship is definitely tight-knit. Like I said, there was about 560 permanent sailors at one time on my first ship, and you know every single one of them, and they know your reputation, and it can be good or bad, or you don't have to be friends with everybody, but everybody knows you, and they see you around and say hi. 8 months later, you get really annoyed at everybody. There's all these phases where everything's fine, then everybody just hates being there, and everybody's grumpy, and then towards the end, the last few months, everybody kind of calms down and becomes friends again. And then you pull back in, and then you get another one of those, we call them stand-down periods, where 50% of the ship goes home, and then they switch and everything. And then you're back to your regular import kind of period, which is about a year in between deployments.
All right, and while on deployment, can you speak a little bit to how you build community? Like, was it the day-to-day working environment that helped build community? Was it port calls that helped with stuff like that? Mm-hmm. How did you find a way to still have a good time while on deployment?
Yeah, a lot of video games. No, so I was stationed on a ship, and the thing that I tell here at school, I'm on the crew team, and I tell those guys what makes a good team is mutual suffering. It's kind of a joke, but it's definitely true. So when you're working out at sea, there are no working hours. It's just 24 hours on. You get to sleep some of that, and you're just working. You're doing the mission. I was an engineer, so you're running the ship. You're making sure the propulsion equipment is going, making sure the ship is moving. You work a lot. Part of the community is eating. The chow hall, you get served breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's kind of your big chance to sit down with everybody that you like and catch up throughout the day, and just kind of goof off a little bit for a few hours. And a ship that big, where mine was pretty large, you are afforded the space and a little bit more time to actually do fun things. I know one higher ranking person was well versed in mixed martial arts, and so he made time after the work day to set up mats in a hangar bay and supervise Marines and sailors wrestling each other. So we had a big tournament for Marines and sailors. You can imagine how that went. We threw Call of Duty LAN parties, bracket tournaments, poker nights. We have Steel Beach picnics, is where you get a Sunday off, and then you get to go up top and they grill up picnic style lunch or dinner, and then you get to enjoy the day out in the sun, and everybody kind of relaxes a little bit. So they do definitely understand that it's you're stressed out the majority of the time, and then so they make it. Deployment's a little more relaxed, where you're working so hard all the time that it's not so imperative that you don't goof off all the time, because you have to just get through that day somehow, and let your guard down a little bit and have fun with your buddies. So.
Gotcha. So, do you recall the day that your service ended, the day you got out of the Navy?
Yes. Two of those. I have the one actual day that I got out, and then the day that I realized I was getting out. The day I realized I was getting out is my longtime buddy just regular friend that maybe from high school, that I don't see very often. He asked me, how's it going? And I was telling him about my job and, time in and everything. And he goes, well, how come you sound so sad to tell me all this? You sound like you don't like what you're doing. And it kind of hit me, and I said, I don't really like what I'm doing right now. And that's not to say the whole time I didn't, just at that point I had kind of gotten over it. So talking to him, I kind of realized, you know what? I don't have to do this, because joining at 19, you're kind of in it for the ride, and it's a lot of fun, and you don't really think long term. Of course, you can always stay in and retire, or do your 20 years and retire, but for like the first 4, I did 7 years. So like the first 4, man, you know, you signed up for that, and you're like, oh, this is fun, young guy, traveling the world, whatever. Then I did 3 more, and I kind of realized, I don't have to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. So I decided I was going to get out, but of course you can't just get out, right? You have to wait till your enlistment term is up. So I had to wait about 2 years for that, and through that 2 years, I just reaffirmed that, you know, this is not the next 15 years of my life. You know, I wanted to go to school, so I got out. And yeah, it was about that time that I started seeing all my high school friends graduating college on like Facebook and everything. I said, oh, you know what, that looks nice. I want to do that. And then the day you get out, it hits you in the face, because one day you're getting 2 checks a month, and then that day they kind of cut you the severance time, like, oh, you're in the middle of the week, you get this much money and you're done. Now you're on your own. Like they definitely have a huge transition process to like help you through that and make sure you're on the right path and set up when that day happens. But it's still very like sobering when you say, oh, I'm not getting a government paycheck anymore. Ooh, okay, you know?
All right, so how was your transition back, that transition you were talking about, how was it transitioning out of the military and like after you transitioned out of the military into the college environment?
Yeah, so I knew right away that even when I was still in the Navy, I was registered for school at Mesa Community College here in San Diego. I knew that's what I was going to do. I knew I was going to use my GI Bill, my government benefits for education. And I knew I was going to stay here in San Diego for at least a few years while I was going to community college. I had already had an apartment and friends and a social network and, you know, stuff here. So I was like, I'm not going to move home to Seattle just right away. So they send you to an exit class, and that's like 2 weeks long, and they inform you of the things you need to know. Like one of the big things is how to apply for unemployment benefits, they do a job training, like an interview course. They teach you stuff about taxes, just things that you need to know that you didn't necessarily have to worry about working for the government. So they set you up pretty good like that. And then I just instantly, in a fall semester, I think I had to wait a month from the time I separated to the time the first semester at Mesa started. And that's where I've been so far. I had to do 2 years at San Diego Mesa, and then I transferred here to USD. And that really wasn't a hard process. I mean, one of the benefits of joining the military is you're taught, like I was saying in the boot camp process, you're taught to kind of just keep your things together, take care of yourself, learn what to do and how to find that information that you need to keep yourself successful. And then transferring here, I finally felt like I made it, like out of community college, all right, I have a tuition here, I have a community here. I joined the crew team to kind of facilitate that desire for like a team aspect of life that you definitely get when you're in the military. So now I, have a network here at school, a purpose, which is the rowing team, and it just very much feels like I felt in the military, where I rely on people and people rely on me again.
So kind of going off of that, since community we're talking about, how do you see maintaining that during your transition or after your transition out of the college life and into kind of the workforce?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, well, I guess I'm in the same boat as everybody here, where I'm not certain how to transition or what will happen when I transition out of college. The one things I do have going for me are my resume will say veteran and student athlete. So I'm kind of hoping that I'm studying mechanical engineering, and I do want to stay in the San Diego area. And I think one of my biggest things I'll be chasing down at graduation is I would like to work for a government contractor, somebody like Lockheed or Martin or General Atomics or Spaware. I think that they definitely reinvest in veterans. And I would like to give back to the Navy a little bit. If I got a chance to use my engineering degree to help the Navy, that would be phenomenal for me.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.